The screams echoed through the dim hallways of Rikers Island as two rival gangs clashed inside the housing unit. Guards rushed in, but instead of order, chaos exploded. Shanks flashing in the fluorescent lights, fists pounding against flesh, and inmates scattering in all directions. For the jail that had been called one of the most dangerous in America, this wasn't unusual. But on this night, something pushed the violence further than anyone expected. By the time the brawl ended, blood covered the cracked floor tiles, and an officer lay unconscious in the middle of the chaos. The question on everyone's lips was chilling. If even the guards couldn't survive, what hope did anyone else have inside Rikers? To understand this moment, you have to know what Rikers Island really is. It's not just a jail, it's a city within a city. At its peak, over 10,000 inmates were crammed into its sprawling complex of buildings, each unit housing men and women accused of crimes ranging from petty theft to brutal murder. It sits on an island in the East River, isolated from the rest of New York City, but its reputation spills into every corner of the 5 boroughs. To many, Rikers is more than a jail. It is a living, breathing symbol of fear, corruption, and neglect. One of the most haunting stories from Rikers was that of Kalief Browder, a teenager accused of stealing a backpack. He spent 3 years inside, much of it in solitary confinement, without ever being convicted of a crime. The isolation broke him down, mentally and physically, and his tragic story exposed the deep cracks in Rikers' system. For many Americans, Browder's case became the reason why Rikers wasn't just a dangerous jail. It was a nightmare that swallowed young men alive. But Browder's story was only one of many. On any given day, Rikers echoed with the sound of cell doors slamming, the shouts of inmates, and the weary footsteps of officers trying to keep control. Violence could erupt anywhere. In the hallways, in the recreation yards, even in the mess halls. Some guards turned a blind eye, while others were accused of smuggling in weapons, drugs, and even cell phones. For inmates, this meant survival wasn't about serving time. It was about the gangs ruled much of daily life inside. Bloods, Crips, Latin Kings, each had their corner, their enforcers, their rules. New arrivals often had to choose, join a gang, or become prey. For the weak or the isolated, Rikers was unforgiving. A single mistake, a wrong look, or simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time could mean a beating, or worse. The balance of power shifted daily, and the guards were often outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Conditions made it even worse. Cells were overcrowded, bathrooms broken, food often inedible. Summers turned the blocks into ovens, while winters left inmates shivering under thin blankets. Medical care was slow and complaints were ignored. Lawsuits piled up, each one painting the same grim picture. Rikers wasn't just dangerous, it was inhumane. The officers themselves weren't safe either. Many were assaulted, threatened, or bribed. Some cracked under the pressure, while others became part of the very corruption they were supposed to fight. It wasn't unusual to hear stories of guards running contraband or looking the other way during fights. For those who tried to stand firm, the job meant walking into danger every single day. But the most chilling part wasn't the fights, the gangs, or the corruption. It was the silence that followed. After every outbreak of violence, the halls would fall eerily quiet, as if the jail itself was holding its breath. Inmates would return to their cells, guards would sweep away the blood, and by morning, it was as though nothing had happened. Rikers had a way of yet everyone knew the truth couldn't be buried forever. Families on the outside demanded answers. Activists protested for reform. Politicians promised change. But inside, little shifted. The same fights, the same corruption, the same despair, day after day, year after year. And still, men and women were That night, after the gang brawl left an officer unconscious, rumors spread fast. Inmates whispered through the walls, passing stories like currency. Some said the officer had been targeted by a gang leader as a warning. Others claimed it was revenge for a brutal beating that had happened days earlier. But one rumor chilled even the toughest inmates. The fight had been planned. Not by the morning after the riot, tension clung to the air like smoke. Officers walked the tiers with sharper eyes, their hands resting close to their batons. Inmates moved slower, heads down, but their whispers didn't stop. Everyone had heard the rumor that the gang fight was staged, not by the gangs themselves, but with help from the inside. In a jail already rotting with corruption, the officer who had been beaten lay in a hospital bed, unconscious, his skull fractured. His fellow guards muttered about payback, some demanding harsher crackdowns on the blocks. But others looked uneasy. If the whispers were true, then one of their own had betrayed them. Trust among the staff, already fragile, began to crack. And in a place like Rikers, behind the walls, gang leaders thrived on the chaos. To them, the brawl had been a show of power, proof that even in solitary cages and locked-down tiers, they could make the jail bend to their will. Messages moved through hidden channels, passed in folded paper, whispered during meal lines, smuggled through corrupt guards. The gangs had grown comfortable in the crowd. Elijah Torres, a young inmate serving time for robbery, watched the events unfold from his tier. He had kept his head down since arriving, avoiding trouble, but even he felt the shift. Before, survival meant staying invisible. Now it felt like everyone was being forced to choose sides. The gangs wanted numbers. The guards wanted informants. Meanwhile, outside Rikers, pressure mounted. Reports of the riot hit the news, sparking outrage. Families of inmates demanded to know how such violence could erupt inside a jail supposedly under heavy watch. Politicians scrambled to defend their positions, some promising reform, others calling for the jail to be shut down entirely. But those promises had been made. Back on the island, the officers launched surprise shakedowns. Cells were flipped, mattresses torn apart, lockers emptied. Shanks and drugs were found, but that was expected. What shocked the guards was what they didn't find. No clear evidence pointing to which gang had started the riot. To the officers, this only deepened the suspicion that the fight hadn't come from the inmates alone. One veteran guard, Officer Daniels, began to speak quietly about what he'd seen. He claimed he had noticed another officer escorting inmates into positions just before the brawl broke out. At first, no one believed him, until others admitted they too had seen things that didn't add up. If Daniels was right, then someone in uniform had orchestrated the chaos, risking lives to prove a point, the gangs seized on this rumor, using it to spread more fear. They taunted guards, yelling through the bars that the staff couldn't even trust each other. "Your own people set you up," one inmate shouted, laughter echoing down the corridor. For the officers, the words cut deeper than fists. The line between guard and criminal blurred, and the sense of control slipped further. That night, the jail seemed quieter than usual. Too quiet. Inmates stayed close to their doors, voices hushed. Guards patrolled nervously, gripping their radios, waiting for the next eruption. And then, in one of the older blocks, a fire alarm shrieked. Smoke began to pour through the vents. Officers rushed in, scrambling to find the source. The whispers turned into certainty. The riot, the rumors, and now the fire. It wasn't just inmate violence tearing Rikers apart. Someone in uniform was playing a deadly game. And as the smoke settled over the island, both guards and inmates were left with the same terrifying thought. If corruption had sunk this deep, then maybe Rikers Island. The fire shook Rikers to its core. Inmates who had spent years inside swore they had never seen anything like it. For some, the smoke was just another sign that the jail was crumbling. For others, it was a message. If staff were willing to light flames inside their own prison, then no one was safe. Rumors spread faster than smoke. Each story dark. Investigators were called in, but almost immediately walls of silence went up. Guards refused to name names, afraid of what would happen if they spoke out. Inmates claimed they had seen officers carrying bags into the closet hours before the blaze, but their words carried little weight in official reports. The truth became tangled, caught between fear, lies, and silence. Elijah Torres, the young inmate, listened carefully from his cell. He realized that the gangs weren't just watching each other anymore. They were watching the officers too. The balance of power was shifting in ways he didn't understand. If the guards couldn't trust each other, then maybe the gangs would fill the gap. Elijah wondered how long it would. At night, the prison grew louder. Inmates pounded on doors, chanting, shouting, demanding answers. It wasn't just about food or broken showers anymore. It was about survival. They wanted to know who was behind the fire, who had left them choking in their cells. For the first time in years, the gangs stopped fighting each other and started directing their rage outward. The warden ordered stricter lockdowns, but the more he tightened control, the more the pressure built. Inmates were confined to their cells for days at a time. Food portions were cut, and recreation was canceled. Guards patrolled with riot gear, faces hidden behind shields. Rikers no longer felt like a jail. It felt like. One evening, an officer carrying food trays collapsed in the corridor, clutching his throat. He had been poisoned. Panic spread among staff. Was it an inmate's trick, or was it another message from within their own ranks? No one could say for sure, but the fear was undeniable. The poison confirmed what many had already suspected. By then, the island was boiling with suspicion. Guards eyed each other as if every man in uniform might be a traitor. Inmates pressed against their doors, watching, waiting, sensing the cracks widening. And somewhere in the shadows of Rikers, someone, whether inmate or officer, was pulling strings with terrifying precision. Rikers Island was never meant to be a place of safety. It was meant to be control. But control had slipped. What began as whispers of gang fights had spiraled into fires, betrayal, and poison. Guards no longer trusted each other, inmates no longer feared the system, and the line between protector and predator. Stay tuned for the next part, where we uncover even darker truths and the moments that finally pushed Rikers Island to the brink of collapse. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more true crime stories.